So here's the scoop. More accurately this week, the shake. We took advantage of a special buy one get one free deal in Charlie's, our unofficial sponsor.
Yep, I'm enjoying that one this week, and I went for the cookies and cream. What you got?
Mint chocolate chip this week. Yeah.
There we go.
So we're going to talk about flipping your class, and one of the first questions that comes to mind is why? Why should you flip your class? And the reason we really thought this would be a valuable piece to cover at this time in the semester is you may get a snow day, which is a great use. I know when we had a snow day the other day, I used it to flip my class.
Or having a baby.
It actually
helps.
When I first came here, it saved my bacon when my daughter was born, and put a class online, and I was able to pick up and actually had much more developed conversation when we were ready to pick up and keep rolling the next time we met.
Right.
And so there are a lot of reasons why this might be beneficial to you if you have to be out sick sometime. And also, maybe for none of those reasons, maybe you just want to increase a bit of the continuity inside and outside of the class. That's kind of a helpful thing. And so we're going to give you just a few specific activities that you can use. And the big takeaway here is we don't want to present this picture of this perfectly blended class that's going to be really daunting. We want to provide just a couple of brief things. Maybe just commit to flipping a little 5-minute portion of your class, something brief. Start small.
Just a single activity or two.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so it's a good place to start to get your feet wet.
The one thing to watch for, though, right, as we've kind of talked through internally, is when we think about flipping the classroom and blended learning, it's not exclusively this idea of one and the other. You're not trying to snap two pieces together. You really want to look at this shift in pedagogy to say, we're blending these theories. We got to pull it together and make it one engagement. So our first steps, these first activities we're going to show you are going to be nuclear examples. Of how you can do that. Just starting simple without flipping your entire class. You know, if you've got a 90-minute class, you might not know how to handle that right away. And then still there's some strategies to build. So to start, our first option is just kind of looking at what kind of tools are in Schoology that we can use to create video instruction. You know, some sort of recorded options that you can put on Schoology and put it up on our eCampus. So one of the first things you'll look at, and we're going to show it here for a quick moment, is the video recording tool. The video recording tool is going to let you and your students engage in video lecture material. And so one of the things you'll be able to do is, as you'll see here, attach these kinds of files directly to your instructions, making your instructions a bit more robust. Or, more specifically, the idea being there, you can create some lecture content, you know? So maybe you're not presenting just instructions, but you're actually presenting a quick 5-minute lecture. And this tool itself is great, is easy to use for just, you know, like assignments and things like that. But you can also use it in the updates. And this is where I'd like to kind of bring together a synthesized idea here. Maybe, I don't know that I'm going to make money on this one, but I'm going to call it snapcasting.
I like that.
Right? Think about a podcast. What do you do in a podcast? You got 5 to 10, maybe sometimes they're 15 or 30-minute long podcasts with some sort of content discussion or presentation. Now let's think about Snapchat. That's a common tool that the kids are using these days. It's about 30-second increments where they just send videos to themselves quickly, and they kind of come and go. So in this idea of snapcasting, let's take the philosophy of podcasting where we're presenting serious information to be reviewed, to be used, and truncate it down. Let's pull it down into maybe 2-3 minutes. Use your updates tool, maybe your mobile phone, maybe your laptop at home or something like that, and snapcast your professor, your students, that is. You're the professors, not your students. Just send them like a 2-3 minute lecture per week where you're giving them some pre-information before the classes that are going on. So you can hit your topic, you can start your class discussion then when you get into the room and say, hey, so I put out that snapcast this week. What did you think about my 3-minute synopsis of this current event? Yeah, there you go. You've got a flipped activity right off the bat just using Schoology. So a couple of ideas there. Now, the other one that we can kind of think about is a tool called Big Blue Button. And this is where, so before we were talking about maybe an asynchronous learning activity, what you'll see on the screen now is Big Blue Button. It is a synchronous video option. And so with our online faculty and our blended faculty, this might be a really great option, as you're seeing it come up now, to present video to your students synchronously. Set up a Thursday night or a Friday night 30-minute, hour-long class time for your students to connect with you and work with them online. Present to them something that they'll be able to wrestle with through the week, and then come to class and be prepared to talk about. Cool part about Big Blue Button, As you're seeing, there's some handwriting that you can do. There's chat tools. You can record that for 7 days, so you can have the students watch it after the fact, only for 7 days, but it's still there. So these are just some tools that we're looking at and some thought processes that are going to support flipped learning through eCampus.
Yeah, and a benefit of even a synchronous tool like that, maybe if you're out of town at a conference and you say, hey, the students, I know they have that time, so let's plan to meet. And that is an option for you. So another one is the way our students interact with our reading. And sometimes we say, okay, just tell me, what percentage of the reading you might have done. But we don't really have a good measure of how deeply they engage with the text. And so when we have students read prior to class, we want to have them engage in a meaningful way with the text so that we can really discuss it when we come together again. And so a great way to do this is to use some sort of graphic organizer, like a mind map or something. And so students are forced really to identify major ideas here. You can see one on the screen. And they have to prioritize. They have to identify relationships between them. This graphic organizer here forces them to think through what they currently know, the ways the reading then stretches their understanding, the way it grows it, and then maybe any further questions they would have. So it's a great, very visual tool for their processing of the information. Here we have another example of a mind map using a free website which is super easy to use called coggle.it. It's very easy. Again, you're forcing students to prioritize concepts within that, within the reading, and so when you see that, when you get to see their layout, you can see whether they really got what's important or not. If you want to go the extra mile, you can perhaps present a very minimal or maybe even flawed mind map and have the student correct it, and they're only really or grow it, improve it, and you're only going to be able to do that as a student if you've actually read it and read it well.
And one of the things we even talked about when we were looking over this idea was, in that presenting like a flawed one, maybe even just present an unfinished one. You think in that terminology, go both ways. Give one that they can fix, because that's really going to show that they're processing it, understanding it, working through it, wrestling with it. But maybe, when you're first starting with this, present like just a started one. It has 2 or 3 points on it so that you're modeling, hey, here's how to start, and you can let them finish it. That might be a good way to kind of lead into that kind of activity.
And something like that, again, part of the idea of a flipped classroom is freeing up class time. Move that lecture online so you have more class time. So perhaps students compare mind maps and say, hey, why did you put this idea here? Why did you think that was more important than this idea?
Right.
And all of a sudden you have an excellent learning opportunity for your students to bounce ideas off each other, to grow their own understanding by interacting with others.
Not to mention it's a learning artifact. So it's something you can hold on to, and we've started to see how we use them even professionally. Justin's using them all the time with some of his doctoral studies, keeping them and referencing them as learning artifacts. Now the next idea, we're kind of looking at how can we take a discussion, the Schoology discussion tool, and use that in context with a lecture. So Justin and I kind of brainstormed 2 main ideas here, trying to make sure that the students have the time to vocalize their thoughts if they're processors, right? Maybe they're not somebody who wants to speak quickly, they're not external. They take some time to internally process something, and they want to have maybe that venue for them to speak. But it's also then something that's going to connect with this flipped classroom mentality where, in Justin's physical class, he has an index card that he hands out. Students leave at the end of the class and they have to submit their exit ticket before they leave. Turn that into a discussion. Put the discussion up and say, hey, post in your discussion what your thoughts were on a clearest and muddiest point from our lecture today. Yeah. Then they have to put that time together to synthesize their thoughts. They can see each other's posts. Maybe that's going to help them even stimulate thought for what they could respond themselves. Yeah. The other side, though, so that's one way that you can kind of take that exit ticket tool, maybe a physical tool, and turn it into something digital. The other one that we kind of discussed was running a parking lot during your class. And I use this in a lot of my webinar training, where I keep a parking lot that's available to the learners to use throughout my conversation. I always encourage, raise your hand, interrupt me kind of questions. But imagine if you've got those internal processors. They don't want to speak up. They don't feel comfortable with it. Introverts. There's a number of reasons why some people don't speak. So if you put a discussion in your eCampus class called a parking lot, and you encourage your students throughout the class to use that to post questions to you if they're uncomfortable raising their hands, or if they just they don't want to interrupt, or whatever the situation may be. Then you can kind of follow up with that as a running parking lot, right? A space for that kind of conversations and thoughts, where you can either connect with it at different points in the class time,
Sure.
Or it becomes an activity that you're working with after class, and so you can prep them and respond to their questions after class, and then use that to build the class discussion in the next class period.
Yeah.
So that's how we're kind of integrating this.
I think that's really the key, is that you can then run with it and say, rather than lecturing for almost the entire class period, at the very end, right before class is over, okay, who has questions? And so many of you are wonderful lecturers that I think our students are still processing all of the information they've just taken in. They're not quite sure how to sort it and what to do with it.
I'm still processing some of my thoughts from John Soden's classes. I mean, Dr. Soden, it's the truth. I just have that information in there that I've got to hold on to. And
Yeah.
It's a couple of
So
years
it gives
ago.
them a bit of time, and the benefit then is maybe you spend 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes in the next class to
Right.
say, hey, some of you had some really good questions, and the whole class can benefit from that and gain a deeper understanding than they would have if the typical one or two who always ask the questions
Yep.
were just asking the questions.
Yep.
And so that's part of the connectivity that flipping your classroom can give you rather than just having face-to-face experience. So another way of envisioning this is actually using peer review. Let me explain how we've envisioned this. We've kind of thought this may work. And so let's say a student's writing a paper of some sort or working on a project. And so the idea here is that using just a simple discussion forum online, they can share files. And what we're actually, one of the thoughts we had is that they wouldn't actually do the peer review online. They could get those papers from their peers through the discussion forum, but then we commit class time to having the peers sit side by side and they come prepared with their comments and face-to-face share their ideas.
Right.
That way you can walk around, step in where you need to, observe where you need to as the conversation's happening, and then perhaps a class discussion comes out of that. How did your peers' paper, maybe it was on a different topic, but how did it make you think differently about your own problem that you're working through in your paper? And so there's some excellent opportunities, again, that we work as a group that students just won't have if they're alone.
And that great idea there to front load the paper time outside of class for them to review it and prepare those questions is great, because we recognize differentiation in our learners. It's not anything weird or fancy. It's just uniqueness. We all learn at different rates. We read at different rates, etc. Give your processors who need more time to go over that in serious detail, give them that time outside of the classroom. And in another sense, you capitalize on the time you have in your classroom by not having them do that reading beforehand or during your classroom. You have it all done beforehand
Yeah,
in
there
this
you go.
flipped experience. So definitely, I think, a great way to capitalize on that.
Absolutely.
Now, the last thing we look at is group projects. Okay, a lot of times we do group projects. Maybe we give time to our students in the classroom, and that's a great idea to maintain because they're excellent opportunities for the students to work together and kind of navigate this journey of your topic area, your content area together. However, as we're going to show on the screen here, there's a way to use the Schoology platform, the eCampus, to facilitate this as well. And in this example, it's just showing quickly how one discussion assigned to the group becomes a platform for sharing files, sharing ideas, etc. in a private context. You're using a tool that's called the Discussions with an individually assigned tool on it, option, and you're good to go.
Yeah.
All through the semester, the students have a virtual place where they can park their ideas, work together, prepare outside of your classroom, and then maybe instead of, sometimes that happens with your group experiences in your class where they take 5 to 10 minutes just to get themselves organized and oriented to what they need to address, and then they've got 5 minutes left to actually address the topic you want them to do. Put that front-loading time outside of the classroom. Say, hey, you have to come prepared to Thursday by talking it out with your group, determining who's the leader, determining who takes what steps. And then in the class, you can discuss this topic. And maybe you hold those topics so that they don't do too much preparation, or it depends on how you're trying to organize it, of course, what kind of learning experience you want them to have. Honestly, how much frustration you want to put into their learning process, because that can be a helpful thing. Don't give them the problem. Make sure they're just organizing themselves so that they get the problem in class and can really address it. Or give them the problem beforehand if you think that that's not a component of the learning experience, so that they come ready and they jump right into the task.
You know, and it doesn't necessarily have to be this large group project. Perhaps there are just some burning questions, some provocative questions in your course that would really benefit from groups of students working on them. And so you can maybe present that beforehand, and they can come together and work on some of those really complex and intricate problems that are perhaps complex enough where one student alone really couldn't tackle it. And then it can be a great example. Perhaps different groups are working on different problems, but that can be a platform for a very rich discussion when you're together.
Right. And hey, here's a great idea, synthesis for on our own end here. Throw your group project experiences together with a couple of snapcasts.
There
Throw
you go.
some little videos into the discussions, into each of your group discussions. Give them different questions per group. Challenge them with different thoughts, so that maybe you can kind of start working in jigsaw context, so that each group is coming with different information from their online experience into the classroom, and then they can continue to work with each other to fill in those information gaps. Tons of rich experiences here, and this is where we just kind of want to look to say, your online experience and your face-to-face experience, they don't need to be divorced. In fact, we encourage you to marry them. This process here, we want to say that this is all a connected process, and blended learning, as I mentioned before, is not like putting two things side by side. You know, you really need to do this integration, and these, I think, are some simple steps to do that with just one or two activities.
Yeah, I think just to kind of frame this, to kind of package this up as we close out this section, we want to make sure we clearly communicate expectations to our students. If this is a different thing for you, say, hey, this is new. I expect you to behave in these ways and to engage in these ways.
Expectations are key. I know on myself, you know, in work and professional life, if the expectation is there, I rise to the occasion. So we need to set that with our students. And honestly, on their side, I've heard this once or twice, they expect you to use the technology.
Yeah.
They're using it every day, and so we can kind of work together in that relationship to capitalize on this as an educational experience.
Yeah, and just one more thing I'd like to share is I found it to be, for me, the most helpful piece of advice when I think of flipping my own classroom. And that's of thinking of these different activities as kind of a pre-class, in-class, post-class, this connective storyline that's happening. And the idea is, pre-class, we're introducing new concepts. Perhaps that's your lecture. And that gives them time to kind of process it. When you come to class, you develop that new understanding and take them a bit further. And then after class, you still run with those concepts and you try to extend their learning. And so you take them just outside of their comfort zone. You've introduced a new concept. Then when you were together in class, you've been able to see, hey, are there gaps in their understanding?
And
everyone get it?
what is there. You're reinforcing
Exactly.
what is working and filling gaps that aren't.
And then that last step, that next online piece after your face-to-face class, you stretch them just a bit further.
Yep.
So the idea of kind of that continuity is just really helpful for conceptualizing this idea of a flipped classroom.